Gracias y bienvenido a Drupal Camp Costa Rica. That is about the extent of my butchering of my grandparents' mother tongue. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome you guys to our event today, and I'd like to thank our sponsors and hosts, especially Raul and Elaine at Parallel Devs. They allowed us to come here and chat with you guys today, so welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. First things first, we'll get rid of the obligatory introductions. My name is Devin Montoya, and I am developed my first website in 1994, ages and ages ago. Since then, I'm a hobbyist to a professional, specifically in the e-commerce domain, but I have also participated as an architect on the back end for the direct-to-consumer fulfillment process. I've worked as a project manager, a scrum master, a team lead, an architect, a teacher. I've worked with large utilities, education, human resources, but at the moment I've actually returned to my web development roots, and I'm enjoying my time with Agility Solutions as a Drupal developer these days. For those of you who don't know, Agility Solutions just won their second Acquia Engage Award for return on investment. We're all very, very proud of that. We did that for Helmer Scientific. We're really proud of that particular activity that we did. It's a huge success story on its own, but we're also developing success stories in cybersecurity, healthcare, veterans affairs, my partner spoke earlier today about a fantastic job that we actually did in helping a consumer ink company create a second business line around hand sanitizer, and helping them with a success story, not just for themselves, but for saving the business. So that's what we're all about. We're all about teamwork and partnership. And so that's what we'll talk about a little bit today, is teamwork and partnership and communication. Feel free to enter any questions you like in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor it. And I'll have to kind of go back and forth between the display and chat, unfortunately, because I only have the laptop monitor today, and I thought I'd be able to get that to work. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with a little anecdote. 3 people walk into a bar. Each of them walks up to the bartender, and they place their orders in turn, and they go ahead and they order 3 drinks. When the bartender comes back after fixing the cocktails, he brings them 3 different drinks. Why do you suppose that is? Well, how about each of them is speaking their own native language, but not all 3 of them are speaking the same language? Bartender understood enough of what he thought to bring them their drinks, but didn't quite pick up on it. And that's really the gist of what we're getting through here, is a failure to communicate. So we're not going to do a lot of technical stuff today. We're going to discuss a lot of things about how we actually communicate with each other as individuals, as team members, and what we can do to facilitate some of that moving forward. Some of it will have technological bent, the tools that are necessary to go through and do this work. But for right now, we're gonna focus on how we discuss things as a community. So one of the greatest barriers to success in any endeavor is miscommunication. And this is actually what I studied at university. Web development was a hobby for me that became my profession. But I actually, as a student, I was a student of history, political science, philosophy, and several other liberal studies disciplines. The joke was that I could study long and hard and think very deeply about being unemployed. What I didn't recognize at the time is that education might not necessarily get me a job outside of education itself. But what it actually did give me was the skills to keep any job I got by performing it effectively and through being a good communicator. And this is the big part of the liberal studies discipline. Anais Nin, Franco-Cuban author, has one of my most favorite quotes, which is, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." And it's a commentary about how our personal viewpoint shapes the way that we see things. How do we ask a question? How do we answer a question? And so that's the real trick, is to learn how to align how you communicate with someone else's viewpoint, and bring them along in turn. It is a two-way street, and it is about collaboration and communication over time and growing to that. And it takes practice, and it especially takes teamwork. But it's a necessary component to be able to reconcile disparate understanding between the way people speak and the way people understand. So you might ask yourself, what in the world does this have to do with Drupal development and Drupal design? Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot going on here. Have you ever actually had a really fantastic idea, but you just couldn't get others on your team to see your vision, or perhaps, they would sit there looking at you confused, or you were the one looking at them confused while you went through this fantastic idea, and they looked at you puzzled, or you were like, I don't get where this person's coming from. Well, a lot of this is just, we come up with a great idea, and then we put it out there the way that we see it. Well, it's an opportunity. Every communication is an opportunity to learn a little bit about how the other side sees things, as well as to share how you see them, to bring them along, and to create that common ground. And so it's a case of understanding. And I think one of the areas where this plays in from a development standpoint is with younger developers and younger designers who actually go through this process of, they've got all this book knowledge and they're out of school and they learned something, but they don't really know how to communicate what they've learned to others, especially those who maybe don't fully understand how they're trying to put it out there. So it's a question of interpretation. So what we're going to discuss today, we're not going to engage in how to interpret a client's requirements. There's an entire cottage industry built around analyzing and developing and bringing the request from the client to the developers and back and forth. So we're just going to make the assumption that the client's request is part of the equation. It's understood that that's what we're doing. But what we will try to go through today, and I hope I can impart some of this effectively, is how the designers and the developers can communicate with each other through the process, both in the tools necessary to develop that communication, as well as some of the process about how we do things. Some of this is the secret sauce at Agility is me. No, I'm just kidding. Realistically, a big part of it is developing those processes and getting all sides of the team, the client, the designers, the developers, the project managers, and the executive staff to understand where each of us are actually coming from. So we'll start with a handful of communication tools. So the image here, I was looking for a screwdriver and I couldn't find one, but you can knock in a screwdriver with a nail with the butt end of a screwdriver, but it's a heck of a lot more effective to actually have the hammer. And obviously, you would need a screwdriver or a wrench to be able to to get a screw to go in, as opposed to knocking it away with a hammer. So a big part of this is just being able to have the right tools for the right job. And in this case, what we're really talking about are the tools that harness communication and collaboration for the entire team so that they can actually produce the appropriate results. It's never been more true than today that this is, everybody's working remotely. We're in the midst of a pandemic. Many of us as developers and designers have worked remotely for years. I mean, I've worked remotely. I've launched websites from the pub down the street. I've communicated with my team from in the States while I've been in Amsterdam. So I'm fortunate that my career has allowed me that luxury, but a lot of people are coming to this for the first time, and a lot of organizations are coming to this for the first time. So I think what we can do is we can take a moment to talk a little bit about some of the tools that actually help us work more effectively in a remote situation. I don't know how many people here are independent contractors and how many of you might actually be part of a larger organization. But every project needs a way of tracking those stories. I use the term stories as a certified Scrum Master. To me, everything is a story. So I can use the term task, story, deliverable, ticket. It's all the same to me, but I generally tend to use the term story. So it doesn't matter whether you're old school waterfall, you're agile, you're hybrid, I just figured out how to do this on my own and it works for me. The main thing is being able to find tools that are effective. It could just be a spreadsheet. I mean, I'm a hobbyist. I paint things and I draw things and I build things. I'll just put it all in a spreadsheet and say, I need all these things. These are the tools I need. These are the things I'm trying to accomplish. But that's really not going to affect, it's not going to have a positive effect on a larger organization. So the main thing about being able to have effective tracking tools is that they need to be available at all times. Again, looking at the current state of affairs today, with the pandemic and everybody working remotely, we need to be able to actually identify what those tasks are at any point in time, to be able to update them or add new ones, to go through that as a process, to be able to notify our team members and say, hey, I just updated this story. Can you go and take a look at this? So maybe it's you finished development, it's time for code review. Maybe you did a first draft on the design and you want to be able to let someone else know. Having these tools available to your clients as well, that's another big part of it. So a big part of it is being able to have tools that expose this to the outside world, to not just our internal organizations, but also to our clients. So you could use dedicated packages like Jira. Well, I mean, I'm a huge Jira fan. I've used the entire Atlassian suite for years. Rally, which is a very dedicated agile format tool set for tracking stories. Right now at Agility, we're using Monday.com for this. It allows a lot of automations and a lot of our ability to go through and put things together and have it be effective. We can tailor design boards. I have a board for design. I have a board for my external design that's client facing. We have a development board. We have our customer service bug tracking board, support services. We use it for our own internal things as well as client facing. So I'm a bit of a Monday convert these days. It doesn't do everything that I could do in Jira, but it's also a heck of a lot easier to set up. So there is that. And sometimes you just need to be able to put things together quickly. Maybe that's kind of another part of it in this, is that having something that you can build quickly to track these efforts is a big part of it. You don't want to waste a lot of time, especially if your organization is very small. But at the same time, you want it to be able to do all the jobs you need it to do. So to be able to have a design board and a development board and have them be different, that's a big part of how we actually can perform these things more effectively. And it increases client engagement. I mean, we have our clients in on most of our external facing boards. They can submit their own tickets, and then we decide whether it's a support ticket or something that requires an estimate for development. Okay, so we can track our stories. That's fantastic. But what else are we trying to do? Well, first let's check and see if we have any questions. Sure, Bill. Yeah, I will attempt to slow down. Normally I'd be on my feet and actually walking around a stage and doing these presentations. And unfortunately, at the immediate moment, I'm just sitting here in our chair. But yeah, I'll try to slow down. Thanks for that, Bill. So, oops, that took us back one too far. Email, telephone, video conferencing. They don't require any explanation. I'm a big fan of direct messaging. Direct messaging allows me to perform the same activities that I do with email, except it's instant. And so, I'll harass our CEO by sending him a message in Slack and texting him, and then maybe sending him an email with follow-up. So, I'll treat it with the full shotgun approach. But again, the main thing here is just to have a quick and effective means of communicating with your team, especially when we're all remote. If everybody on the team agrees, I'm going to be on my messaging software from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you're listening for the ding on your phone or the ding on your laptop, then everybody knows. It's another part of it is this understanding, this rule, or this agreement that we've all said, hey, we're gonna actually work on these things together this way. So if you work for a bigger organization, maybe use Microsoft Teams. I've worked, with several organizations over the last 3 or 4 years. Google Hangouts was our de facto communication tool that we actually leveraged. These days, I'm a big fan of Slack and Discord. Discord's fantastic for both an enthusiastic perspective and a professional perspective. I think Slack has been around as a professional tool for a lot longer. Again, to clue you in, we're using Slack currently at Agility, and we have our own dedicated Slack channel that is internal just to us with each of our project channels where we can communicate. But we also have client-facing Slacks where the client can reach out to us at a moment's notice and say, hey, I submitted a story, I did a thing. We're a remote team, and we're spread all over the place. We're on the West Coast, we're in Mountain, we've got, people overseas. And so we've got a large group that needs to be able to communicate, and I can't always trust that they'll be available when I need them to be available. So I might shoot a message in Slack and say, hey, when you sign on tomorrow, take a look at this for me. So that's just another opportunity. But again, it's about the speed and efficacy of being able to communicate effectively. We'll talk about how we communicate with the teams a little bit better, but a big part of it is just knowing that when you send that message out into the void, it's going to get responded to. And quite frankly, you can miss a telephone call. Not everybody has time to sign up for a video meeting. And I don't know about you, but inboxes are just flooded with information, which I tend to only review in the morning and in the afternoon. So being able to communicate with your teams quickly about specific things is a big part of it. And then going back and talking about using our tracking software, that's another part of it. Having software that is online, available at all times, where you can write messages in and then communicate those messages out to the team. And you can integrate Monday with Slack so that when tickets come in or people do messages, you can get the notifications in Slack. Checking to see if we have any other questions. No. Again, I did save some time for Q&A at the end, but if you are interested, by all means, please feel free to go ahead and shoot a message through chat, and I'll tab back and forth in to see if I can keep tabs on that and get some questions to you when you have them. All right, so we've talked about the basic stuff. How do I communicate and how do I track? So obviously the design tools are a big part of it, especially as designers. And I am going to focus primarily on the design teams and the design phase, because we're talking about how the designers and developers can collaborate and get to that handoff, and we can leave how the developers manage that final, like, afterward, for another conversation. And you're free to reach out to me. I'll make sure my contact info is available at the end. But let's just, today I think is the most fortunate time to be a web designer. I'm specifically talking about web design, not graphic design, even though they both have some shared disciplines. In the old medievally times, we did all of our comps with Photoshop and Illustrator, or if we were cash strapped as an organization, or if you're an independent contractor, maybe you use GIMP, which is essentially free and fully featured. But then you have to take what you design and you have to extract all this additional information to be able to actually translate it into complex HTML and CSS and whatever dynamic programming language you're using, whether it's PSP or JSP or what have you. So in the old days, like I said, I've been doing this since '94, designers designed and developers developed. But we're reaching a point where that is now becoming something very different. I don't remember exactly when Sketch hit the market, but it wasn't too long ago. But it revolutionized, the design portion of the process. Suddenly we had this intuitive tool that was capable of affording designers to do more than just create a simple comp. Designers who actually embraced web design and the tenets of front-end design, were capable of leveraging Sketch in such a way that you could shortcut a large part of the initial development process. That's huge. Everybody's expecting us to do so much more with so much less time. Anything where the team is capable of stepping forward and improving that is a huge boon. And Sketch, it provides, you can share them and collaborate with them. I know Sketch has some new collaboration tools that are a little better than when it first hit the market, especially with being able to have your Sketch material up on the cloud. I don't want to gush about Sketch too much. I'm a fan of Sketch, but I also have a problem with platform dependency. Sketch is a Mac-only product at the immediate moment. And unless you work for a well-funded organization or you got personal deep pockets, that $2,500 MacBook and the licensing for Sketch can be a bit of a pinch on some folks. So I think, you know, not to poo-poo Sketch in any way, shape, or form, because I think it's fantastic and it does have half of the market share, and it does provide these tools that allow us to export the you know, our prototypes and our UX and our UI designs to developers, that give them a lot of the tools, the CSS and everything they need to put that material out. That's huge, and I don't want to poo-poo that, but you know, it does kind of step away from this idea of being able to have the entire team effectively collaborate and communicate, which brings us to the new kid on the block, Figma. I haven't used Adobe XD yet, but we got a chance to really start stepping in and using Figma this year. So, you know, it wasn't too long after Sketch revolutionized everything that suddenly Figma and Adobe XD came along and said, hey, we're going to shake stuff up. And, you know, Adobe didn't want to give up a portion of their market share, so they built a new ground up tool. But then we have Figma, which is platform independent. You can get a desktop app for it, but it is essentially browser based and full featured. And if you're using it as an enthusiast, it's also free. Now, it's not going to be free for those of us who work in larger organizations and are using it as power users. But if you want to understand what it's capable of, you can get in and play around with it without having to dump out any dough. And I think this is where things really got interesting for us. Here is a tool that is browser based. So as long as you have access to the internet, going back to our current state of affairs, we're all working remotely, and that means we do need the ability to have the internet to do our work and collaborate. We can actually communicate and collaborate directly through the tool in real time. Figma is capable of supporting multiple users in. You can have your designers in, you can have your content editors in, you can even have your developers snooping around, you know, getting a pre-look at what's going on. It runs on Windows, it runs on Linux because it's browser based, so it doesn't matter what you're working on, you have the ability to step in and grab this. And to me, I think that's a really big deal. And you know, I sound like I'm gushing on it a little bit, but this goes back to the heart of, I need to be able to communicate with my entire team in as quickly a manner as possible, and get answers as quickly as possible. So, you know, if you have a question or you want somebody to prove something, you can be, you know, doing that almost immediately as the team's in there. So we actually had a recent project this spring where our one of our designers decided to actually take the entire setup that we had. We had just moved out of UX and we were moving into UI. We were going through and getting all of our comps dialed in, and they moved us off of Sketch and onto Figma during the design process. Now, we had talked about, well, this is a good idea, we should look into this. And next thing I knew, they had actually just moved us over. And it was seamless and flawless. And a big part of it is because he took the time to really get in and understand how Figma worked. But being able to make that transition in real time was amazing for me. I thought that was fantastic. And at that point in time, I was sold. I said, let's use Figma from this point out until there's a reason not to. So I got really excited about that as an opportunity for us to be able to leverage that. It also has a lot of templates, and you can build your own templates. And this kind of brings us into, you know, well, let's start talking about how this pairs into Drupal in the development process. In a quick second, but before we move on to that, I wanted to point out we have another project coming up here. We just got started with it, and we're actually doing the lion's share of the front end development in Figma, and we're actually going to basically export that and transpose it directly via Storybook into a React front end. So we're essentially just going to shortcut the entire front end piece altogether, and the only heavy lift that the developers are going to have to do is plumbing it into the main guts of the site. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to work. I hope that plays out as efficiently and quickly as possible. So anyway, okay, so that's enough of me gushing about Figma. If you haven't tried it yet, please, I urge you to give it a whirl. I know we have a few other people talking about Figma here, entirely about Figma. So please give that a whirl. All right, so content tools, we're all Drupal developers. We wouldn't be here if we weren't, whether we're designers or developers. So regardless of what design tools you use, your CMS platform should have some kind of a library to actually go through and help us further some of these things together. You'll forgive me, I have to keep tabbing back and forth. Actually, before we get started, do we have any questions at the moment up to this point? Okay. Really quickly, Drupal itself, uses block and paragraph libraries, and we can set those up. And I think that's the key to being able to move this process forward. As a designer, knowing that you're designing to something that perhaps you've already established, especially if you are using Sketch or you are using Figma or Adobe XD, where you've created a template for this size. You have your breakpoints for mobile. So here's the desktop version, here's the mobile version. Being able to run through all of those pieces quickly and easily, and just recycle a little bit of color or typography or what have you is huge. So I won't get too much into the library portions of that. I'll simply suggest that as designers, designing towards the library that the developers have already built, or participating in developing that library from the get-go, is a huge part about being able to perform these things effectively. With Drupal and a little bit of elbow grease, you can clone an entire site, an entire platform, and roll somebody's site out immediately, and then just focus on your design tools to change the typography and the colors, and a handful of the layout pieces, by already having this effective library in place. Which brings me to the big piece, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to develop a design system. I have a link in the presentation. It will be made available when we upload it. But if you are not currently using a design system at your organization or as an individual, I absolutely to take this opportunity to do so. A design system is just the collection of everything that you're working on. So, your paragraph styles, your color themes, everything else. It's a design guide on steroids, and being able to build that and put that online for your team to see, your clients to see. It helps you put these pieces together in a way that everybody's communicating the same language. This is how we built this. These are the primary colors we use. These are the secondary colors we use. As designers, I'm sure you're thinking, hey, yeah, I know this already. But if you're not using a design system and you're not advocating that your organization use a design system with your clients and with the remainder of the team, it becomes that much more difficult to communicate effectively. You've already done the hard work to make this a certain way to begin with, and everybody's happy about it. So being able to leverage that, being able to point new developers and new designers who come in and say, hey, go here and review the design guide, and then we'll talk about a little training application that leverages that to see, if you understand what our guiding principles are. So this is a big part of how organizations mature, but you don't have to be particularly mature to have a full design system. Go out and take a look at what some of the heavy hitters in the industry are doing. Shopify, Google, Apple, they all have theirs published, and you can go and you can actually review it and see the way they've done it. They've done all the hard work for you. So here's an opportunity for you to learn from the big kids and bring that into your organization and learn a little bit more. All right, so getting a little short on time here because I'm long-winded, but that's essentially the tools. Let's talk a little bit about the talent, right? So where did I go? Did I skip one? Oh, I lost one. I knew it. So, well, really quickly, we'll bounce ahead. So the short version is, now that we actually have some tools that allow us to collaborate and communicate effectively, we have to figure out how to do that as part of the team. So what I tried to illustrate from the tool portion is that the tools need to be available consistently. They should be, available at a moment's notice. They should allow you to, to be able to enter whatever information you need in and communicate that effectively with the rest of your team. And so hopefully it's easy and hopefully it's effective. But now we need to talk a little bit about how the teams understand one another and how you go from the initial estimate with a client all the way through to the actual handoff. So web design and graphic design are fairly similar with one another, but they're not the same. Web designers and web design really do benefit your entire project from understanding the front end skills and understanding how to prototype. Really good web design, it requires clarity on the client's intent and the constraints in which the site will be developed. And you can't, quite frankly, you can't do that effectively if at least your lead designer and your lead developer are not communicating during the estimation and the requirements process. Again, this may seem like, oh, well, that's intuitive, we should be doing that. But you'd be surprised how many times it's just the analyst that goes and talks to the client, and then they come back and they dump things off of the designer, and the designer didn't get a chance to hear that firsthand, or didn't really understand what the client was trying to do. So there's an opportunity to participate in advance and understand what the client's really trying to achieve, and how we're gonna keep all those, how we're gonna help them achieve their goals, but stay within the constraints of the project itself. So our designers collaborate right from the get-go. They're part of the initial estimates. They're communicating with the developers, especially when we're looking at a library. Oh yeah, we have 5 paragraphs that do this. Let's have the client wants to do this carousel or this item. Let's try it with this one. So there's an opportunity for the designers and the developers to communicate with one another and say, hey, here's the thing we did that I think will solve that problem for that particular client. And then the goal is not just to go off into your silos, but to continue participating. And the easier it is to communicate with one another, the faster you can actually identify some of those constraints. And then a big part of it is also, being able to make those edits in real time because you're using a tool like Figma or Sketch, or being able to ask questions in real time because you're using a web-enabled tracking system like Monday, or you're using Slack to communicate. And I can't say this enough, and this comes from having both a role on both sides of the fence, actually on all 3 pillars of the triangle, so to speak. Your developers need to take an active role in reviewing the designs as early as possible, and this can come from the initial estimate. But your lead developer and designer should be communicating regularly during the design phase. Going back and forth and really understanding, what's going on, and not being afraid to ask questions. I know that's a challenge. Some people don't want to, oh, well, why were you doing it that way? And waiting until the very end, and instead being able to interact or to come up with some ideas in advance. I'm a big fan that, you've got your lead at least, or your architect working with the designers to keep tabs on what's happening with the client. But then providing the designs and the ideas directly to, providing the designs and the ideas directly to the entire development team, so they have a chance to absorb them, and then come in and actually have an interactive handoff meeting. Come in, have the developers come in prepared to ask questions. Why do we do it this way? I don't understand what the CTA is supposed to do. Did we build a prototype for this? But the key in there, again, is having those questions and communicating those questions fairly early. And because if you do that, we're going to be able to avoid those development delays later, which, of course, is the bane of all projects, all successful projects. Not to get too much in the project team, the managers and the project managers and the analysts, but as a PM, my job is always to translate what the clients, designers, and developers understand about the project. It's also, my partner uses the term chasing butterflies. We want creatives to create. They are creative for a reason. We want to turn them loose, and we want them to come up with amazing ideas and designs. At the same time, projects are not infinite in scope or money. So, we really do need to have a team that is capable of corralling the designers and developers. You can chase all the butterflies you want, but they got to be these 1,000 butterflies inside the net. You can't go chasing the ones that are outside. But over time, this develops into an organic understanding that this is as far as I can go, or I can ask the client, and the client can say, well, can we do this? And say, hey, that's a good idea. Give us let us take that inside and talk about it, and we'll come up on the next review meeting. So that's an opportunity there. So that pretty much brings us to the end of it. We can have some Q&A after this, but I think, I wish I had another half hour to go through this. Actually, I wish I had another 90 minutes and a whole bunch more slides and the ability to stand up on a stage. But the real goal in all of this is to develop a cohesive team, and that requires, communication at regular intervals. Good teams and good peoples occasionally fail. Bruised egos and hurt feelings happen sometimes when things go wrong or they get misunderstood. The key is to learn from those failures by asking questions and getting critical in the real version of that word. How did we miss this? What could we have done better? Why was a particular issue so challenging for us? It's not about placing blame at all. It's never about placing blame. Ask as many questions as you can during the process, and don't be afraid to ask those questions afterward when something goes wrong. At the same time, acknowledge what goes well. Really focus on that. And be able to communicate. You should be doing retrospectives throughout your projects on a regular basis. But when a project comes to its conclusion, you absolutely should be spending that time learning and growing from one another, and spending time collaborating. The more time we collaborate, the more time we communicate, the more we develop those keys to a successful partnership between us as individuals, developers, designers, and project managers, as well as between our organization and the client. The reason I have this goofy slide up here is, how do we get from banging rocks to start a fire to splitting the atom, to putting a man into space, to putting people into space? Well, it was shared experience and knowledge. It was a collaboration. We as a people, we collaborate and we work consistently and effectively with one another over time. And in doing so, we're able to grow, to expand our knowledge, and expand our roles. And that isn't done without teamwork, and it isn't done without effective communication between the members of the team. So developing good teams, it's an active process. It's not just enough to get on and say, hey, this is what we're doing for the project. Getting to know your team members can also help you communicate with them more effectively. Learning, do they have a dog? Do they have a cat? Do they like to play games? Do they like to, to go antiquing? Understanding what people do when they're away from work can also help you understand a little bit about what they can do in work. So I apologize, I ran a little longer than I should have, but if anybody has an opportunity to let me know, and if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in chat. I'll bounce here to the very end of our slide presentation just so that I can put my contact info up. So we'll have some resources, so come back and check out just some basic things of what we did to understand a little more. But you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Devin Montoya. You can also go to our website at agilitysolutions.com and go to the reach out page. Or in design process is convenient to include developers, or this isn't necessary at all. Felipe, fantastic question. I personally think it is important to include the designer or the developers in the design process as early as feasibly possible. Generally, at least the lead designer, when you're trying to figure out how to put some of those pieces together. So a good example would be if your lead developer is communicating with your lead designer while you're putting some of the pieces together, your developer may have an opportunity to say, hey, I don't know how we're going to make that work. Maybe you have a really great idea and you put it in the design, but you didn't get a chance to prototype it. Or maybe the developer says, hey, I read this in the requirements, and the client says they want a carousel that does X, Y, and Z. And I have an idea. We built this paragraph, this thing. Let me show it to you. And so I think including them fairly early, not as decision makers, but more as helping to inform the progress as early as possible is viable, but not so that it gums up the works. The design team really does need to be able to take their understanding of the project and put their spin on it and put things together. But I think at least having the lead developer or the architect involved early, I think may be able to help you put some better designs together that maybe answer some technological questions before they come up. I hope that answers your question. No, thanks for the question, Philippe. I really do appreciate that. Thank you, Alejandra. I appreciate the thanks for that. Officially, this is our time, but if you have any further questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to to talk with fellow members of the community about Drupal, about process and communication. So again, thank you very much. Look for this presentation on the Drupal Camp CR site. We'll be uploading it shortly. And there are no more questions. It's going to conclude us for today. All right, gracias. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of the venue, and go out and learn some new Drupal stuff and learn some stuff. I hope this helped everybody today. Thanks again.